August 1970, Downton Abbey, North Yorkshire. The taxman's taken all my dough, and left me in my stately home. Lazing on a sunny afternoon. It could have been written about them. George Crawley, grandson of Mary and Matthew Crawley, strode across fields that were soon to be houses, the song that had just been on the radio playing in his head. New houses, to accommodate new workers, at the new steel foundry that was expanding from Scarborough to the north. He had only known great-grandpapa for a short time. Fuzzy memories of an old man, standing by the window in Downton's sitting room, looking at his cream Labrador running in the summer's sun. On a day very much like this one. August, the month of holidays and the sea, and sand, and ice creams by the beach. Grandmama Gillingham had a boat and he had taken it out from Suffolk, sailed it around to Kent and brought it back again last summer. But even they were struggling, and had decamped to London permanently, leasing their estate to a business venture. Who made cheese, for heaven's sake? In his mind's eye, George had been lifted aloft into the old man's arms and had things pointed out to him that Sir Robert had thought important. George could not remember. And, even if he could, what good would that have done him? Great-grandpapa was not there now, and when he had to deal with death duties to an heir before, so grandmama had told him, he had come up with little. Because there was little to do, and much to pay. The Kinks had been dryly accurate to the plight of so many of the aristocracy. So many factors had contributed to stately homes being abandoned, to the point of ruin in some cases, where a family had run out of heirs, where money was owed and they had upped to another property, cheaper to run, or sold to one of the most prolific owners of stately homes in the country, namely the National Trust. Taxed to support the lower classes in the socialist mechanism, to pay the going rate, to allow reasonable time off, to pay for the NHS and other social safety nets, to make fewer demands of servants, or at least fewer than in great-grandpapa's time, if there were people outside his door to take up positions in the first place. The last time he had placed an advertisement in The Lady for a Housekeeper, George Crawley Jr. had no applicants. Too many don't want to stay in. His grandmother Mary had explained to him, sniffily. And the hours they would have to put in means they are put off. She reached for her glass of lemon water. Why would they work here when they can work in a factory or an office for more? George Jr. could not answer. Nor could he discern a plan. Not one that would save his grandmother's childhood home. His father's come to that, and Aunt Sibby's and Aunt Marigold's. Aunt Caroline, his father's sister, had no ideas, but she was away, anyway, living in Switzerland with her husband, running a school in the mountains, a finishing school for the titled. The older money, the better, Granny Mary had told Georgie. What we cannot match in wealth we can dazzle with breeding. George had spoken to Peter at length. Bruncaster was safe, always safe. With the Pelham money I cannot spare enough to match automotive cylinders. They would take the higher offer, and if you anger them, if I anger them, they might be hostile, turn Granny out of the dower house, whose land was already being encroached on by the housing company that had originally bought the land in the 20s and had, in their clause, a first refusal to any other land on a 50-year agreement in conjunction with the county council. His father, a lawyer like his grandfather Matthew, had trained in the law after the war, with the urgency of a man whose very life was at stake. He had spent all his short life trying to get out of the gentlemen's agreements of great-grandfather Robert, who made deals on the fly after dinners and the races, and so forth, but had not lived long enough to experience the consequences, the adverse effects, of such folly. "And what will you do, Harriet?" George's mother asked of him. "The house will go. We have the flat in London. You have your education, though you have been late to Oxford. You will have missed the men of your generation." Of course, that was mother all over. She would miss Downton too. Of course, George Jr. knew that. She had come one weekend just after the war, just after the dramatic revelation of a traitor, Aunt Sibby's father, and, according to Granny, never really left. "You can be damn sure the Germans will be working on a bomb," he had told Vannevar Bush, at an ultra-closed meeting in Washington. His words were then repeated and the scientific world, most vociferously, of course, by Teller. A world filled with men who had fled with Europe with their lives and who meant to do all they could to use their Nazi-rejected talent against that hated regime. But, you will know, Chadwick had told the man, on his next visit, his twins and his wife safely in Canada, traveling by train as he had done to California. Hansberg had read the messages Chadwick had received, fluent as he was, of course, in German, and given to Friss the one covered in lines, which had turned out to be an ancient Gaelic language that Milo had taught Otto Friss at Cambridge, and that they had had fun using between one another. Now, she had used it to inform the man of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute's progress with uranium. She writes German well, only a few corrections in her grammar needed. Chadwick smiled at the memory but has been at the Cavendish when Milo had been there, when Oppenheimer had had his disastrous few months. It had he who had suggested Max Born to him, leave and try working under the best physicist in Europe. Chadwick liked Booth, who had had to apologize formally for publishing a spoof physics paper and had woken up the vice-chancellor with a morning punt along the cam singing at the top of his voice Lohengrin. These happy memories buoyed the man along the road until Melusina Ashby's cottage came into view. But the rest of Downton, excepting the pub and the old Gara bear shop, was half abandoned by people who knew that the village was dying and were leaving it while they had a better prospect somewhere else. He was here. Ernest Barrow needed his help. Chadwick smoothed his jacket pocket wherein lay Milo's message. He was ready.